In 1994, a science fiction film arrived that nobody in Hollywood quite believed in, yet somehow convinced audiences all over the world. Stargate, directed by Roland Emmerich and written alongside producer Dean Devlin, told the story of an ancient portal device that connected Earth to a distant planet governed by a false god. On paper, it sounded outrageous. In practice, it earned nearly $197 million worldwide against a $55 million budget and launched one of the most unexpected media franchises in modern entertainment history. But behind that success lies a collection of strange, surprising, and largely untold facts that most people walking into cinemas in 1994 never knew. Fact 12. Kurt Russell was sent the wrong script and rejected the film multiple times. Before Kurt Russell ever stepped in front of a camera as Colonel Jack O'Neill, he repeatedly said no to the role. The reason had nothing to do with the actual finished script. As producer and co-writer Dean Devlin later revealed to Variety, Russell had been sent an early draft of the screenplay that was never supposed to leave the writer's hands. That version was rough, underdeveloped, and gave no real sense of what the film was trying to accomplish. Russell read it, hated it, and turned the film down. Then he turned it down again, and again. Nobody on the production side caught the mistake for a while, and Russell kept receiving the same response requests and kept sending back the same answer. It was only when someone realized he had never actually seen the completed shooting script that the situation changed. Once the right version landed in Russell's hands, his reaction shifted entirely. Devlin recalled Russell saying something along the lines of, "Oh, this isn't so bad." That was all it took. Combined with a reported salary of $7 million, which at the time made headlines and even raised some eyebrows given the financial strain on production company Carolco Pictures, Russell signed on and brought his military credibility and quiet intensity to the role. Fact 11. Jay Davidson demanded $1 million, expecting to be turned down. Jay Davidson was not a career actor seeking his next big role when Stargate came calling. He was a fashion designer working in London who had stumbled into the film industry almost by accident, discovered at a party, and eventually cast in the critically acclaimed 1992 film The Crying Game, a performance that earned him an Academy Award nomination. That level of attention was not something Davidson enjoyed. The spotlight made him uncomfortable, and he had no particular desire to step back into it. When the Stargate producers came to him about playing Ra, the alien god at the center of the story, Davidson saw an opportunity to escape the conversation quickly. He made a demand he fully expected would end the discussion: $1 million. It was a figure he calculated no reasonable production would agree to for an actor with limited credits and no major following. He waited for the rejection. It never came. The producers accepted the offer, and Davidson found himself committed to a film he had tried to avoid making. Fact 10. James Spader called the script awful and nearly walked off set. James Spader's relationship with the Stargate script was complicated from the very beginning. He has admitted openly that his initial reaction to reading it was that it was awful. That was not a polite understatement offered later with the benefit of hindsight and box office success. He genuinely thought the writing was poor. And yet, something about the awfulness intrigued him. He told Entertainment Weekly that the terrible quality of the script was actually what made him want to meet the director, because he wanted to understand what Roland Emmerich saw in the material. That meeting apparently worked. Emmerich got Spader excited about the adventure and the tone the film was going for, and Spader came aboard to play Egyptologist Daniel Jackson. But the tension around the dialogue did not disappear once cameras started rolling. According to Devlin, there was a day on set when Spader refused to come out of his trailer because he felt the scenes being filmed that day were so poorly written that he could not in good conscience perform them without changes. He held up the entire production. Kurt Russell apparently had enough. He went directly to Spader's trailer and confronted him. The exchange that followed has become one of the more memorable pieces of Stargate behind-the-scenes lore. Fact 9. Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes were both offered the lead role. Before Kurt Russell was attached to the role of Colonel Jack O'Neill, the filmmakers considered two very different names for the character. According to TV tropes and various production accounts, both Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes were offered the role before Russell eventually came on board. Neither accepted the part, though neither generated the same production chaos that the wrong script situation with Russell did. The reasons behind both rejections are not fully documented in public records, but the casting conversation was clearly wide-ranging before landing on Russell. The fact that Connery was in consideration is particularly interesting given the eventual shape of the character. O'Neill, as written, carries a certain weathered authority, a man hollowed out by personal tragedy who accepts a likely fatal mission with grim determination. Connery in 1994 was still very much regarded as one of the defining screen presences of his generation, capable of bringing exactly that kind of weight to a military figure. Snipes, on the other hand, was riding the momentum of films like New Jack City and Demolition Man, and would have brought an entirely different energy to the role. Fact 8. Stargate was the first film in history to have an official website. In 1994, the internet as a public-facing space was barely recognizable compared to what it would become. Most people had never visited a website. The concept of using the internet to promote a film was entirely uncharted territory, and yet Stargate holds the distinction of being the first film ever to have an official website created specifically for its release. This fact is frequently cited in retrospective coverage of both the film and early internet history, and it places Stargate in an unusual position as both a science fiction story about alien technology and an actual pioneer of digital promotion. The website predated the now standard practice of studios building enormous online presences around their releases. There was no social media in 1994, no streaming trailers on demand, no influencer marketing. The Stargate website existed in a world where most cinema audiences had never clicked a link in their lives. It was a gamble on a medium that had not yet proven its commercial value, made by a production team who were themselves taking risks at almost every stage of the film's development. Fact 7. The composer was working in a video rental store when he got the job. David Arnold is now recognized as one of the most significant British film composers of his generation, best known for scoring 5 James Bond films from Tomorrow Never Dies through Quantum of Solace. But in 1994, when he was hired to score Stargate, he was a 32-year-old virtual unknown who had recently applied for a job at a video rental store because he needed money between composing projects. His only prior film credit was the 1993 British crime thriller The Young Americans, a low-budget production that very few people had seen. What brought Arnold to the attention of the Stargate team was a circuitous chain of connections that ran through one of the executive producers on The Young Americans, Mario Kassar of Canal+, and an executive at Carolco Pictures. His music from that earlier film ended up in the hands of Emmerich and Devlin, and they decided to take a chance on an unknown composer for a film with a $55 million budget. According to Arnold himself, the job came at a moment when he genuinely could not afford to keep working as a composer without supplementary income. Arnold spent months in a hotel room writing the score, repeatedly revising, and improving it as production delays stretched the timeline. The result was a sweeping orchestral work that drew heavily on ancient Egyptian musical ideas and cinematic adventure traditions. Fact 6. Hollywood studios rejected the film because they thought it would cost $100 million. Before Stargate found its financial backing, Emmerich and Devlin took their concept to every major Hollywood studio they could reach. The response was consistently negative. Studio executives struggled to understand what kind of film they were being pitched, and those who grasped the concept dismissed it on budget grounds. The prevailing estimate in those development rooms was that a film of this scope, with its ancient Egyptian setting, alien technology, desert planet, and large-scale action, would cost somewhere around $100 million to produce properly. Emmerich argued that he could deliver the film for half that figure. Nobody believed him. Hollywood at that time was not in the habit of trusting German directors with no major American blockbuster to their name. Emmerich had come off Universal Soldier, having stepped in to replace another director at the last minute, but that was not the kind of credit that inspired confidence in executives being asked to fund an alien pyramid adventure. The project seemed risky, expensive, and strange. The breakthrough came through a different channel entirely. Executive producer Mario Kassar, who was an enthusiast of Egyptian art and culture, responded to the concept with genuine excitement and came on board. From there, the French production company Luz Studio Canal Plus agreed to provide the budget of around $50 million, and the film finally had a green light. Fact 5. Roger Ebert compared it to Ed Wood and gave it 1 star. When Stargate opened in October 1994, it was not a critical success. Reviews were mixed at best and hostile at worst. The most withering assessment came from Roger Ebert, one of the most influential film critics in American history, who gave the film a single star out of 4 and opened his review with a line so scathing it has followed the film ever since. Ebert wrote that the film Ed Wood, a movie made about the worst director of all time, was specifically created to prepare audiences for Stargate. That is not a gentle critique. That is a demolition. Ebert's central problem with Stargate was that it took an unusual and potentially fascinating premise and then proceeded to execute it in the most conventional, uninspired way imaginable. A story about ancient astronauts visiting Earth, enslaving populations, and using wormhole technology to connect distant planets is rich with possibility. Ebert felt that Emmerich and Devlin wasted all of that possibility on what he described as a gunfight between good guys and bad guys that could have been set anywhere. The sense of wonder that science fiction demands was, in his view, entirely absent. Fact 4. Jimin Hoon-soo appeared in the film but was not credited by his full name. Jimin Hoon-soo today is recognized as one of the most respected actors of his generation, with Academy Award nominations for An America and Blood Diamond, and a body of work that spans 2 decades of major Hollywood productions. But in 1994, Stargate was one of his earliest significant film roles. He appeared as Horus, a personal guard to the alien god Ra, a physically imposing presence who required no dialogue to communicate threat. It was the kind of role designed around appearance and movement rather than character development. What is unusual is how the production chose to credit him. In the film's credits, Hoon-soo appears listed simply as Jimin, without his surname. This was not a stage name he had adopted or a creative decision he made himself. It was simply how the production chose to list him, a curious omission that appears across multiple official records of the film's cast. For an actor who would go on to deliver some of the most emotionally powerful performances of the 1990s and 2000s, being listed by only a first name in early credit feels like an unintentional signal of how undervalued he was in those early years. Fact 3. The film's success inadvertently destroyed its own production company. One of the stranger ironies in Stargate's financial history is that the film's commercial success was directly connected to the collapse of the production company that helped make it. Carolco Pictures, co-founded by executive producer Mario Kassar, had built its reputation through a run of major action films including Rambo, Total Recall, Terminator 2, and Cliffhanger. By 1994, the company was in serious financial difficulty. Debt had accumulated across multiple projects, and Carolco desperately needed a hit to stay afloat. Stargate provided exactly that hit, earning strong box office returns and generating significant revenue. But Carolco, already in financial trouble, had to sell off the rights to Stargate to MGM as part of a deal struck in February 1994. Some of the money Carolco received from that arrangement was then funneled into financing its next project, the pirate adventure Cutthroat Island, starring Geena Davis. That film began principal photography the same week Stargate opened in theaters. Cutthroat Island earned only around $10 million against its near $100 million budget. By late 1995, Carolco was bankrupt. The company's remaining assets, including the rights to the Rambo, Total Recall, Universal Soldier, and Terminator franchises, were auctioned off. Stargate now belonged entirely to MGM. So the film that performed strongly at the box office, that validated the instincts of Kassar and the team at Carolco, ended up being among the last things the company produced before it ceased to exist. Stargate survived its creator's collapse and went on to define a franchise. Carolco did not survive at all. Fact 2. Emmerich and Devlin planned a trilogy that was never made. From the moment Stargate opened and its commercial success became clear, Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin were vocal about their intentions to continue the story. They had not conceived of Stargate as a standalone film. Their vision from the beginning was a trilogy, a 3-part arc that would have expanded the mythology of the Stargate device, deepened the world of Abydos, and continued the story of Daniel Jackson and the characters he left behind when O'Neill's team returned to Earth. Both James Spader and Kurt Russell were reportedly enthusiastic about returning for sequel chapters. The planned trilogy never materialized. As Stargate's box office returns came in and MGM took full ownership of the property following Carolco's financial difficulties, a different kind of continuation began to take shape. MGM executives concluded that the Stargate concept was better suited to television, where serialized format could explore the mythology across multiple episodes and seasons rather than compressing it into 2 additional films. Emmerich and Devlin had no involvement in that decision, and they had no creative involvement in what followed. What followed was Stargate SG-1, which premiered in 1997 with Richard Dean Anderson in the role of Jack O'Neill. The television series ran for 10 seasons and spawned 2 major spin-offs, Stargate Atlantis and Stargate Universe, as well as direct-to-video films and an animated series. The franchise Emmerich and Devlin envisioned as a trilogy of theatrical films instead became one of the longest-running science fiction television institutions of its era. The sequel films they planned and never made were replaced by more than 300 hours of television. Sometimes losing creative control produces an outcome the original creators could never have predicted. Fact 1. The film had a real Egyptology consultant and still got things spectacularly wrong. Among the credits listed for Stargate is an Egyptology consultant, Dr. Stuart Smith, whose role was to provide the production with authentic grounding in ancient Egyptian history, language, and iconography. This was not a small detail. The entire premise of the film rests on ancient Egypt having been shaped by extraterrestrial visitors, and the filmmakers wanted to create a visual and cultural world that felt rooted in genuine historical knowledge rather than invented fantasy. The hieroglyphic translations shown on the cover stone in the film, including Daniel Jackson's progression from a rough literal reading to a more refined interpretation, were developed with this kind of consultation in mind. And yet the central thesis of the film is itself a direct contradiction of established Egyptology. The ancient astronaut theory, the idea that the pyramids and other ancient Egyptian monuments were built or influenced by alien beings, is not a fringe archaeological position that academic experts are still debating. It is rejected by the entire scholarly field as a concept rooted in misunderstanding of ancient human capability and achievement. Hiring a consultant to make the film look accurate while telling a story that contradicts everything that consultant represents professionally is a creative decision that deserves its own acknowledgement. The film does not pretend to be a documentary, of course. It is science fiction, and its liberties with history are central to its premise rather than incidental mistakes. But the presence of Dr. Smith in the credits is a quietly strange footnote, a reminder that Stargate was simultaneously reaching for legitimacy and cheerfully discarding the foundations of the discipline it was borrowing from. The ancient Egyptians built the pyramids. No alien portal was required. The fact that a film celebrating the idea that they could not have done it without help hired a real expert in the subject they were contradicting is exactly the kind of peculiar, wonderful irony that makes Stargate such an endlessly fascinating piece of cinema history. And that is what makes this film worth revisiting 30 years on. With this, we have come to the end of this video.